Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a recap of everything that happened in the original A Court of Thorns and Roses series. The new book, A Court of Silver Flames, was just released, and I'm hoping this video will make it easier for you guys to remember everything that happened in the original novels. So stay tuned and I hope you guys enjoy. Before I get into the first book, I just want to let you guys know that this video will contain spoilers for the first 4 books in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. So if you have not read the series yet, I do not suggest continuing on with this video. With that, let's get into the first book. Alright, the first book we're going to talk about is A Court of Thorns and Roses, and this introduces us to Farah. So Farah is a human girl living this super impoverished life with her 2 older sisters. And in Farah's world, there are the human lands where she resides in this cabin and just really, really hard life, and the fairy lands known as Prithian, and there's a wall that separates them. And one day Farah is out hunting because she's the only one who can really take care of her family, and she kills a wolf. Turns out the wolf's actually a fairy that was sent by the High Lord of the Spring Court. So the High Lord of the Spring Court comes and is like, you killed my friend, you have to come live with me. It's more detailed than that, but I'm being very general here. She goes to live with him and they fall in love and everything is great. But then it turns out there has been a blight that has fallen on Tamlin's land, and it turns out that blight is actually another fairy known as Amarantha. And Amarantha was sent by Hybern. We'll get into him later. And Amarantha is ruling this terrible court under the mountain and has all of the High Lords imprisoned, essentially. So, and all of the fairies can only use a fraction of their power, so it's very, very sad times for the fairies. So Farah decides she is going to save Tamlin and goes to retrieve him from Amarantha, and in doing so, she bumps, or she's already met, but she meets again Rhysand, who is the High Lord of the Night Court, super evil, she assumes. Turns out he's not later on, but they strike this deal, this bargain, and it is tattooed on Farah's skin because that is how bargains are made in the Night Court. So in the end, Farah is able to kill Amarantha, set all of the fairies free, but in doing so, she is turned into High Fae. She dies and she's pretty much reborn with all of the High Lords able to give her a little bit of power. She's made into High Fae. And it ends with her being very upset over what has just happened, but she's with Tamlin, everyone's free, everything's good. So that is pretty much everything that happens in A Court of Thorns and Roses that you need to know for A Court of Silver Flames. Getting into the characters that are important, obviously you meet all of the characters in this book. Tamlin, High Lord of the Spring Court, who has a beast form that he can turn into, I think they just call it his beast form, but so that is his main power. Rhysand, who is Dimati, which means he can go into people's minds and read people's minds and change them. He's also the most powerful High Lord that has ever existed. Lucian is Tamlin's general right-hand man, who has red hair, a golden eye, and is the son of the High Lord of the Autumn Court. Then you also meet Nesta and Elaine. Nesta is Farah's oldest sister, and she is super abrasive and kind of hard to be around, and she let her younger sister fight through their entire time being completely destitute. And Elaine, who is very quiet and meek, and we don't get very much about her. She's just supposed to be like a very good character, but she also let her sister fight. I'm very biased towards both these characters, if you haven't noticed. But anyway, so just pretty much everything that happens in A Court of Thorns and Roses. So moving on to the next book. So the next book is my personal favorite, A Court of Mist and Fury. And this story starts with Farah, and she is just dealing with all of the trauma that happened to her under the mountain with Amarantha. She is very broken and just has a lot of inner turmoil, and Tamlin isn't really helping her cope. He's just kind of sweeping everything under the rug. So on her wedding day to Tamlin, Rhysand ends up showing up and calls in his bargain that Farah has to stay with him 1 week out of the month at the night court. So perfect timing on Rhysand's part, and she is swept away. Obviously, she's very angry at Rhysand. She wanted to get married, and that ended up not happening, although she was having some reservations right before Rhysand showed up. So it turns out that Rhysand can pretty much go into Farah's mind because of the bond, and he says that he understands that like she's been getting sick and just is completely depressed over everything that happened, and Farah is in denial. So one day, Tamlin, after she's been returned, Tamlin ends up locking Farah up in the house, which completely causes her to have a breakdown. Rhysand and one of his friends go in, save her, bring her to the night court. Now, it turns out that the night court is not actually this dreadful place, but there is a secret city known as Valaris, which is really where Rhysand and his inner circle reside. So Rhysand's inner circle are my favorite characters of all time, and it's Mor, Cassian, Azriel, and Amren. And Cassian and Azriel are both Illyrians, and it turns out that Rhysand is also an Illyrian, which means he has wings and can fly. His mother was an Illyrian. He can also disguise his wings, which other Illyrians can't do. This is important for a court of Frost and Starlight, or a court of Silver Flames. So she's there, and she slowly starts to heal with the thanks of Rhysand, and eventually, after she starts to train with Cassian and Rhysand and just starts to live her life a little bit, she finds out that her and Rhysand are really mates, and they are really meant to be together. They end up having this mating bond, and she's finally healed, essentially. And now she and Rhysand are going to start to fight against Hybern. So Hybern, who I mentioned earlier in the previous book, was in charge of Amarantha. He is this fairy that is trying to take control of all of Prythian and move into the human territories. Really bad guy. And Rhysand needs Farah's help. Like I said before, Farah was turned into High Fae by all of the High Lords coming together and giving her their power. So she has the powers of all of the High Lords, or a little bit of them. So Rhysand and Farah are now going to go up against Hybern. And they realize that they're going to need the other court's help in doing this. And they also find out that Hybern is using an item known as the Cauldron to cause all of this havoc. And the Cauldron is like this super, I don't even know how to describe it. It's like a super artifact that has ridiculous power. And they need to stop Hybern from getting this Cauldron. So at the end, they realize that Hybern already has the Cauldron, but they find something called the Book of Breathings, which will be able to nullify the Cauldron, and Farah is the only one who can use it. So Farah goes to nullify this Cauldron with the Book of Breathings, and it turns out it's all a trap, set by Hybern and by Tamlin. So then we find out that Tamlin has actually been working with Hybern in order to get Farah back, since that is his bride, and he believes that Farah was taken and didn't leave on her own free will. So the book ends with Rhysand going back to the Night Court. He's able to escape with the inner circle, but Farah ends up going with Tamlin. She pretends that Rhysand did kidnap her and that she does love Tamlin, and decides to go with Tamlin in order to kind of see what's going on in his court and see what she can do. The inner circle goes back to Valaris, and Rhysand says, not only is she my mate, but she is also my high lady, which means that she is essentially the queen of the Night Court, and she's also my spy. So she is going to spy on Tamlin's court and hopefully gather some information. So that is how this book ends. Hi guys, so while I was editing this video, I realized I left out some very important information. So at the end of A Court of Mist and Fury, when Tamlin is confronting Farah with Hybern, we actually find out that Ianthe sold out Farah's sisters. So Nesta and Elaine are actually put into the Cauldron by Hybern and turned into Fae against their will. Also, the reason all of this even happens is because Hybern is trying to show the human queens, who I also forgot to mention, that the Cauldron is super powerful and pretty much can grant them whatever they want. And I think they actually wish for eternal life and eternal beauty is what they're really seeking. But the human queens are very important. They pretty much rule the human lands, and Hybern is pretty much trying to get them on his side. So really sorry I left that out, but now you guys know. I'm sorry, that was I feel like that was a very chaotic summary, but I did my best. Like I said, very enjoyable book. Important characters we meet, obviously, Inner Circle. We get Amryn, who is this, I forget exactly what she is, but she's this super old, super powerful creature that's trapped in a high fae body that works with Rhysand. Then you have Moore, who is from the original not Under the Mountain, from, oh my gosh, I forget the name of it. Ooh, that's gonna annoy me. I'll put the name somewhere. Hewn City. She is from the Hewn City, which is where Rhys's like nastier court resides, and super powerful. Then you have Cassian and Azriel, and they are both Illyrian warriors. Like I said, they're the strongest Illyrian warriors under Rhysand, and they have these siphons that are able to give them off power. Azriel is a shadow singer, which means shadows are pretty much able to talk to him, and they're all really awesome. They're just really cool characters. We also meet Ianthe in the beginning of this. She is a priestess that is working with Tamlin, and she's not great. She becomes more relevant in the next book. But I believe that is it. We also see Hybern, obviously, and yeah, I think that's it for the super important characters for this book. So moving on to the next one. The next installment is A Court of Wings and Ruin, and this starts off with Farah, and she is still playing spy in the Spring Court. I forgot to mention a really important character for the last book, and that is Jurian, and he was a commander for the humans during one of the great wars of the past, and Amarantha from book 1 ended up putting his eye into a ring and attached his soul to said eye, and he was able to kind of like see everything that was going on under the mountain. And with the cauldron, Hybern is able to bring Jurian back to life. And he seems like he is against the original Inner Circle. There's a history there with a girl named Meredith. There's a lot going on, but for the sake of this video, just know he was resurrected from the eye, and he went against the Inner Circle at the end of A Court of Mist and Fury. So, jumping in, like I said, Farah's playing spy at the Spring Court, and Jurian is sent by Hybern along with 2 other people to the Spring Court to see if there's any weaknesses at the wall. Like I said, Hybern is trying to find a weakness in the wall and able to go to the human lands and kind of take over. So these 2 people end up being Damati, so they're able to read minds like Rhysand. So Farah's kind of just making sure that these Damati don't read Tamlin or Lucian's mind, kind of protecting them without them realizing that she's helping, because they don't realize that Farah has powers, essentially. So one day, Farah is trying to get back to the Night Court, and she realizes that she doesn't have her full powers. Her powers are starting to weaken, and she sees Lucian being attacked by the priestess Ianthe, who I mentioned from the last book. Ianthe, it turns out, is completely power hungry, and she has a habit of taking advantage of males, and she has her sights set on Lucian. So she has Lucian, I think he's like tied to a tree, and she's kind of doing some stuff to him, and Farah thinks about leaving, and then she's like, you know what, Lucian was my friend, I need to help him out. So she goes, helps out Lucian, but it took so long to do that the other 2 Damati have now come, and they see what's going on. They realize that Farah has powers, and they also say that Ianthe has actually been poisoning Farah, and she's about to have no powers whatsoever. Fabane is the name of the poison. So Ianthe had been sneaking Fabane into Farah's food for an unknown amount of time, and that is why Farah now has no powers. So Lucian and Farah are able to kill the Damati and escape. Tamlin loses his mind. They hear him screaming, but they're able to escape. As they're running, they make it all the way to the Autumn Court before they are attacked by Lucian's brothers. Like I said in the beginning of this video, Lucian is the son of the High Lord of Autumn, and his brothers are also very powerful. I think he has 5 left. I know there was 7 at one point, but a few died. So his brothers attack, the main brother being Eris. Eris also, I should say before I get into this, Eris has a history with the Inner Circle. Eris was supposed to marry Moore, And Mor did not want to marry Eris because Baron, his father, is super cruel and was afraid he would be the same way. So she ends up sleeping with Cassian in order to lose her virginity. So that way Eris wouldn't want her. Mor's family find out. They brutalize Mor and leave her body by the Autumn Court. Eris finds her body and is like, I don't want anything to do with this, and leaves her like that. So the Inner Circle has a lot of issues with Eris. So anyway, the Farah and Lucien are trying to get to the Night Court. They're intercepted at the Autumn Court by Eris and Lucien's other brothers. And before they are captured and taken to the Autumn Court, 2 Illyrian warriors, Azriel and Cassian, drop down, save them, take them to Valaris. So at Valaris, they all kind of regroup. Lucien realizes that the Night Court isn't nearly as bad as he thought. Rhysand isn't this terrible monster he's painted out to be. At the end of the last book, I left a lot out of the last book, didn't I? The end of the last book, Lucien also realized that Elaine, Farah's sister, is really his mate. So he really wants to stay in Valaris just to make sure that Elaine is okay. Turns out Elaine isn't really okay. She's having visions. We then later discover that Elaine is really a seer, which is a gift that was given to her by the Cauldron. We also find out that Nesta, being the complete badass that she is, took power from the Cauldron, and the Cauldron kind of wants it back. So Nesta has taken a very strong power out of the Cauldron and is able to kind of sense the Cauldron because she took this power. So things progress from there. There's a High Lords meeting where all the High Lords come together and discuss what they're going to do if they want to side with Rhysand. And in the end, they all decide, like, for the good of Prythian, they have to go against Hybern. So that High Lord scene is very entertaining. Definitely my favorite part of the book. We're introduced to Tarquin, who is the High Lord of the Winter Court, Hellion, who's the High Lord of the Day Court, 2 great characters. So all of that goes down. So then a war happens, and Nesta senses that at the High Lords meeting, Nesta senses that the Cauldron is about to attack. Turns out that during the meeting, the wall to the human world falls. So they go to war, essentially. A lot of other stuff happens, but I don't think anything's super pertinent to A Court of Silver Flames. I will let you know at the end of this video if I forgot something that you're going to need to know. So all of that happens. There's a war. Nesta ends up saving Cassian. He's about to be killed by Hybern, and she jumps on top of him, and she's like, no, like, you can't, I won't go, or like, I won't stay alive if you're gonna die. Like, I love you, yada, yada, yada. And to this point, Nesta has not shown that she liked Cassian at all, so it was a very touching moment. Cassian's obviously liked Nesta for a long time. And then they're able to kill the King of Hybern. I'm sorry, prior to that happening, and I'm sorry guys, this is a very chaotic video. Nesta is able, like I said, to sense the Cauldron. So when Cassian is fighting in the war, she senses that he is about to get blown to smithereens and is able to call and save him. Unfortunately, although she's able to save Cassian, the rest of his legion is pretty much killed. So that was kind of depressing. Then she ends up fighting Hybern, jumping on top of Cassian, all of that. So yeah, so then the Cauldron is destroyed, Rhysand dies, but Farah is able to convince the High Lords to bring him back to life. Even Tamlin ends up helping her out, and they bring Rhysand back to life, and everyone lives happily ever after, and it's a very good time. So I think that's pretty much it. Important characters. I did not mention the Suriel, who is prevalent in all 3 of these books. She is this fairy that if you catch her, she pretty much like tells you, she answers questions, and she ends up giving Farah a little bit more information than Farah even asked. She's the one who tells Farah that her and Rhysand are mates. So there's the Suriel. There's also the Weaver, who is this evil god, god-type being, very old being. And she is sister to the Bone Carver. Now the Bone Carver lives in a prison underground, and he ends up helping Farah after Farah is able to secure the Ouroboros Mura for him. I know, guys, there's a lot in these books. But the Bone Carver also mentions that he has an older brother that's also out there. There's also Braxis, who they're able to help, or who ends up fighting with them in the war, and he is a demon that also is originally from Valaris, who lives in the bottom of a library and We don't know very much about him. We're pretty sure that if you look at him, you see your greatest fear, essentially. So those are some very important characters that I left out that were in this book. But yeah, so that's pretty much a recap of all 3 books. Now let me jump into the novella. And the last book on this list is A Court of Frost and Starlight. This is the novella of the series. I believe Sarah J. Maas is going to release more novellas in the future, but I approach this very much as a Christmas special. There's not a lot going on in terms of plot. It's really just visiting our characters and see what they're up to after a court of wings and ruin. And it's a fun time. We pretty much find out that part of Alaris was destroyed and they're trying to rebuild. Farah has to figure out how to be High Lady, which she's never done before. Her and Rhysand are kind of shopping. It is winter solstice, so they're getting gifts for each other. Cassian visits a shop where he meets this Illyrian woman. Up to this point, I don't think we've met any women from Illyria. And her wings have been clipped. So she kind of discusses how it's like very tough living in this society. And also, Cassian goes and buys a present for Nesta. So during winter solstice, everyone is celebrating. We find out that Nesta has been making really bad choices and is just not coping well after the battle with Hybern. She's living in the slums. She's drinking a lot. And everyone is really having trouble dealing with her. So Cassian buys her this gift and gives it to her in private. And she chucks it in the river and is like, I want nothing to do with you. So we kind of get an idea that Nesta isn't handling things very well. And Cassian is hurt. So that is pretty much it. We also find out that Farah and Rhysand decide that they are going to have a child together, which Farah originally said she wanted to wait for. And also we find out that Farah and Rhysand are going to build a bigger house by the river that can accommodate all of their growing family. But yeah, so that was it for A Court of Frost and Starlight. Alright guys, that is it for my recap of A Court of Thorns and Roses series. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope it helps you guys remember a little bit of what went down in the series in preparation for A Court of Silver Flames. So if you don't know yet, I post new videos every Tuesday and Sunday, and if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe to my channel. I will see you guys next week. Bye.